Okay. So, since the Jewish holidays are over, there isn't a particular holiday to talk about this week, and especially for the next 4 weeks as we get into the month of Cheshvan. There are no holidays in the month of Cheshvan. So what I figured we would be doing is for the next few weeks until we get closer to Hanukkah, talk about different Jewish concepts that we find in Jewish law or in Jewish thought. And as we travel through the Jewish year, it's not just about the holidays that we encounter or Shabbat that we encounter, but it's also about how to be Jewish as well. So I figured the first one of these topics to tackle would be, since the Texas abortion law went into effect a few weeks ago, that I wanted to talk about what Judaism has to say about abortion and how that is different from Christian thought about abortion. So the Texas law, as we know, and I'm not going to spend too much time on the law itself, but you can go to just Google Texas abortion law, and a number of articles will come up that will provide as much detail as you want about the intricacies of the law. The important factors about the law. Now, I'm not going to talk about how the law works and whether the Supreme Court can rule against it. That's a whole other legal issue that I'm not an expert on, and Judaism has a whole different take on how law structures society. So I don't want to talk about that. I just want to talk about the aspects of the law itself. What does the Texas law ban, and what does Judaism have to say about that? So there are two things about the Texas law that are important. Number one, as soon as a fetal heartbeat is detected, abortion is prohibited in the state of Texas. And fetal heartbeat is the determination in Texas as to whether an abortion can happen or not. Okay, so that's one thing we're going to talk about, is that determination, fetal heartbeat. So fetal heartbeat is usually detected around 6 weeks, and many women don't even know they're pregnant at 6 weeks. So by the time most women do a self-test or go to their doctor to get tested, it's beyond 6 weeks. So if they're in the state of Texas and they want to have an abortion, then it would be illegal. And the only exceptions, and I have this, so I'll talk to you while I bring up my internet, and I have an article from the New York Times that says answers to questions about the Texas abortion law, which was written on September 1st. And so it says, is the law a complete ban on abortions? The law bars abortions once cardiac activity can be detected in the embryo. This typically occurs around the 6th week of pregnancy. Right, there's that. And then does the law make exceptions for pregnancies resulting from rape or incest, or to protect the life of the mother? And the law does not make exceptions for rape or incest. It does permit abortions for health reasons, but the exceptions are narrowly drawn, allowing a termination only if the pregnancy could endanger the mother's life or lead to substantial and irreversible impairment of a major bodily function. So the only exception that the state of Texas allows is if the mother's health is at risk by this pregnancy, or a major bodily function would be impaired. Okay, so not for rape or incest, or certainly not for birth control. Okay, so I want to tackle these issues from a perspective of Jewish law, of what Jewish law has to say about life in general, when life begins, and therefore what that has to say about abortion. Those who want a very detailed and intricate explanation of the Jewish view of abortion can look to this book, Marital Relations, Birth Control, and Abortion in Jewish Law, written by David Feldman, a colleague more of my parents' generation from the Jewish Theological Seminary, was a rabbi in Teaneck, New Jersey for many, many years until he retired. He was on the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards of the Conservative Movement, and this was his area of expertise. So wrote this book. It's very detailed, very legal, well, a lot of legalese in it. So let's begin the discussion this way. We know from the Ten Commandments, one of the commandments is lo tirtzach. How we translate that phrase in English really it serves as the key for how Christianity, as opposed to Judaism, views life. Lo tirtzach means literally do not murder. In the old translation of the Torah, the sixth commandment is thou shalt not kill. There's a big difference between thou shalt not kill and do not murder, because in Jewish law, killing is permitted. Murder is forbidden. Killing is permitted. And what is that? What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that elsewhere in the Torah, well, let's even go back just a couple chapters from when the Ten Commandments are presented in the Torah in Exodus 20. If you just go back 6 chapters, just go back 6 chapters, you have the 10th plague in Egypt. God kills Egyptians in order for Israelites to live. And 5 chapters before the Ten Commandments, you have the Israelites crossing the sea. They cross the sea, the waters part. The waters then go back on themselves, drowning the Egyptians. I just give those 2 examples because those are the 2 most closest to the commandment itself of do not murder, where killing of Egyptians in order to save the lives of the Israelites is permitted, and God is doing the killing. And there are many more examples in the Torah itself with commands, the commandments themselves. When you enter the land of Israel, you are to annihilate the indigenous population in order to ensure that the land of Israel be a holy land, and the abomination of idolatry will no longer pollute the land of Israel. So, annihilating the 7 indigenous Canaanite nations in the land of Israel is a commandment. The rabbis expand upon the idea of how killing is permitted in their explanation of legislation when it comes to war, that it is in a war of self-defense is perfectly permissible, and sometimes a war of offense, that is, conquering the land of Israel, is an offensive war. That is, we can start the fighting, perfectly legitimate and legislated by God as a commandment in the Torah. Self-defense, and once we have set up the boundaries of the land of Israel and a nation attacks us, absolutely, we can respond in self-defense and kill soldiers in the process. So war, for this regard, killing with war is perfectly acceptable. I can't answer for Christianity because Christianity translates that commandment, thou shalt not kill, and that would seem that it does not have any room there for interpretation, except try to explain within the Catholic Church why the Inquisition is okay. That is, the church legislated killing those people who refused to convert to Catholicism, that is, Muslims and Jews in Spain, and they legislated the Crusades. A number of crusades were sanctioned by the Catholic Church, signed into Catholic doctrine by the Pope, so that crusaders killed Jews on their march through Europe. And once they got to the land of Israel, blood flowed freely of the Muslims and Jews that were killed in the name of Catholicism to rid the land of Israel of the infidel. So I can't explain within the Catholic Church how the commandment, thou shalt not kill, is allowed to be reinterpreted to permit the killing of non-Catholics. So that I can't explain. You'd have to ask a Catholic how to explain that. But the second part of this is on a personal level. If someone breaks into our home with a weapon, and it is clear that they are going to use that weapon in order not just to rob us, but kill us in order to rob the home, then we have the right and responsibility to, in self-defense, to kill the intruder. Okay? So this gets more to the heart of this understanding of life, that from a rabbinic perspective, going back to the Mishnah. So we're going back 1,800 years in Jewish legal tradition. Someone who is clear, with clear intention, is aiming to kill you, you have the right to kill them first. And it's not just, let's say, Barbara breaks into my home with an automatic weapon raised, pointed at my head or my chest. I have the right to kill her in self-defense, whether she uses the weapon or not. Clearly, she has drawn the weapon. I'm allowed to kill her. Secondarily, if Barbara breaks into Saul's home and I am a witness, I'm allowed to kill Barbara. Not just Saul, it's Saul's home, but as a witness to these events, I'm allowed to kill Barbara to protect Saul. Okay, so understanding then that the commandment, the sixth of the 10 commandments, says, do not murder. Therefore, to protect our life or the life of somebody else, we are allowed to kill. So, understanding life and how to protect life is a very nuanced matter in Jewish law. So now, how it gets to the conversation about abortion. According to Jewish law, life begins at 40 days after conception, which equals the Texas law of 6 weeks after conception, there is a heartbeat. So 6 weeks is 42 days. Jewish law says 40 days is when a fetus takes on human form. So the embryo becomes a fetus. At that point, it is forbidden to kill the fetus, to have an abortion. However, there are many exceptions to the rule. So, yes, Saul.
Where in Jewish law does it say 40 days?
It's in the Mishnah, and I would have to look up exactly to tell you what the reference is. But if you Google Jewish law, 40 days after conception, just Google something like that, the Wikipedia article or something else will come up and provide a source for you. So it's from the Mishnah. That's element number one. Element number two is related to my example of Barbara breaking into my house. Barbara in that scenario becomes a pursuer. So that she, in Hebrew, the word is rodef. Someone is pursuing after you, chasing after you to do you harm or to kill you. Okay, not just to injure, but possibly murder. The concept of a pursuer is known as a rodef. In Jewish law, a rodef, someone is allowed to protect themselves or someone else from the rodef. And the fetus can be considered a rodef, a pursuer, when the mother's life is at risk. Okay, so the Texas abortion law says that if the mother's life is at risk, then an abortion is permitted. Okay, so I wouldn't move to Texas, and I wouldn't recommend young couples to move to Texas to chance the law. Because I don't know how many OBGYNs would be willing to risk their careers to be willing to stand up and prove the mother's life was definitely at risk. Okay, so I wouldn't want to chance that. But according to Jewish law, the mother's life being at risk counts all the way through pregnancy, even into the process of childbirth. So the Mishnah clearly defines this. If even when, and this is very graphic, if even the baby's legs appear, right? The baby's legs are born, but yes, Margie, I'm getting to that question of mental health in a moment. I'm talking physical health first. So I just want to explain the physical health parts of this, that the concept of the rodef, of the pursuer, someone who's after your life, applies to the fetus, to the potential baby, even in the process of childbirth. So if even most of the baby is born, but not all of the baby is born, but then the mother's life is at risk, so that if any more of this childbirth were to continue, the mother's life might be in severe jeopardy, the baby can be aborted even at that point. Now, I don't know if this will happen in real life, and I don't know if this happened 1,800 years ago as the Mishnah describes it, but they carry the concept of pursuer all the way to the process of childbirth, so that first term, second term, third term abortions are all legal Jewishly if the mother's physical life is at risk. The question now is what Margie posted there in the chat, and that is, what about the mental or emotional health of the mother? This is something that the rabbis have discussed as well. This is harder to prove. I mean, physical health is quantifiable by a doctor. Emotional health, I think, is quantifiable, but is a little bit more difficult to prove. In other words, right? So John Hinckley last week is now, when he's up in June 2022, he's going to be totally free, right? Potentially. John Hinckley, the man who shot Ronald Reagan and shot James Brady, right? So he was committed to a psychiatric institution and was found not guilty due to mental health issue. Just the use of John Hinckley was just because it was recently in the news, and that it is, you can get 5 psychiatrists to examine a patient, and you could potentially get 5 different psychiatric diagnoses, potentially. That I'm not disregarding mental health as a serious health issue. Please do not understand my comments in that way. I only mean to say that it is very difficult and complicated and tragic that it is so hard to definitively diagnose a mental health issue or a mental health problem. Okay, so that when students go to get tested by to have a psychological evaluation as to what kind of learning disability they have. This is not a diss on Montgomery County, but if people go to Montgomery County public schools will do all they can not to have a child tested, because it means that they will have to expend more money and more resources on that particular child, as opposed to a parent needing to get an advocate to have Montgomery County pay to have a psychological evaluation done, or if the parent can afford it, to have a private psychological evaluation done. Okay, so this is just to highlight the challenges people face today when it comes to mental health, when it comes to learning disabilities, etc. Taking care of ourselves by mental health, taking care of our mental health, just look to see what's covered on your own health plan. Mental health usually is not very well covered under most health insurance plans. And it just gets to the tremendous challenges that are still there in America today in 2021 to take care of people with mental health issues, right? The problem of the homeless on the streets of the cities is partly due to the mental health issues and mental health policies of cities and states and the federal government. So all of this as a tangent to trying to understand that when a mother finds out that she is pregnant, that how this might affect her mental health. There will be rabbis who will say if the mental health of the mother is at risk, then an abortion is permitted, all the way through first term, second term, third term, first trimester, second trimester, third trimester. If the mother's health is mental health is at risk. So there will be rabbis who would say absolutely, and they wouldn't require the mother to have to get an evaluation in order to have proof that she could have this abortion. And again, this is all theoretical according to Jewish law, because Jewish law doesn't apply in America, right? You can't get, I can't write a letter and that letter be used by any woman to go to a doctor to say as a prescription for an abortion. It just doesn't work that way. And it also doesn't work that way in Israel. There are separate laws, not Talmudic laws. There are Israeli laws that legislate health insurance and abortion in Israel today. So mental health is definitely an issue that Jewish law says is a valid reason to have an abortion. The other is the perspective health of the fetus itself, right? What if the fetus is tested and comes back, like it's natural to do testing of a fetus all along throughout the pregnancy, right? And sometimes the first testing can't be done until 16 or 18 weeks into the pregnancy. And at that point, you can do DNA testing maybe earlier, but some aren't valid until 16 or 18 weeks. And if the testing comes out, God forbid, the baby has Tay-Sachs, right? This is something I always tell couples when I meet with couples. There are 19, up to 19 genetic diseases that have a Jewish origin to them. The most famous being Tay-Sachs. But couples should definitely have testing, DNA testing, so that they know what they're facing potentially when they attempt to have a baby, so that they know what the risks are and they can have the conversation ahead of time in case the fetus might develop one of those or any genetic disease. The genetic disease, whether it is a reason to abort or not, is also a gray area in Jewish law. There are, if some will say that if it's absolutely clear that this baby has an incurable disease from which the baby will not survive more than a year, and that so-called survival is going to be intense suffering and pain, then most rabbis will agree that the parents can have an abortion in such a case. There was I've used this example before, many, many years ago. There was a couple that found out that in their third trimester, they found out that their baby had this bizarre, tragic tumor growing from its spine outside its body. And that clearly this baby, if it's not going to be a stillbirth, was going to die as soon as it was going to be born. They wanted to know whether Jewishly that it is warranted to have an abortion. I said, absolutely. But this was Maryland, and she was in her third trimester. The University of Maryland hospital system permitted it, but in that case, she was already at 39 weeks. So at that point, they just induced her, and the baby was dead. And I buried this stillbirth in Mount Lebanon Cemetery, and the parents were so distraught they couldn't even be there for the burial itself. And in fact, they even moved away just to start over. So such tragic circumstances. It all depends on how far along one is. But if it's clear that the child, this fetus, has an incurable disease or ailment, then abortion is permitted according to, or termination is permitted according to Jewish law. The gray area comes with other kinds of diseases that could be detected in utero that are not life-threatening, but are life-altering. For example, Down syndrome. Down syndrome is not a killer. People live well into their 60s, 70s, a full life today, definitely intellectually impaired, but who's to judge that an intellectually impaired life is not a quality life? And who are we to allow or permit an abortion in such a case? So I, on first blush, with no, everything is a case-by-case situation. If a couple is strong in their relationship and have a strong support system, I would not advocate or permit a couple to say that they can have an abortion if they found out that a child has Down syndrome. That, or with all those scenarios that I put in place, strong support system, strong strong couple, strong relationship themselves, they have the wherewithal to be able to raise such a child with love and affection and all the support that such a child would need, then absolutely there's no reason to permit an abortion for such a DNA test result. But there are other possible intellectual disabilities that are part of syndromes, chromosomal, due to chromosome imperfections, like I know several people who have children with Fragile X. So Fragile X children develop normally until they're about 5, and then they start not developing so well, and they have intellectual disabilities and some fine motor skill disabilities as well. The intellectual impairment of someone with Fragile X, and there could be some other kind of physical issues as well. That's a little bit more involved than Down syndrome, but it's also not a death sentence as Tay-Sachs is, or cystic fibrosis, or some other kind of disease like that. So all these get into gray areas and get into life of the fetus, the potential life after it's born, and the emotional health of the mother. So rather than to say in this particular case it's absolutely permitted, it's clear that there's no absolutes here. The issues for Jewish law are about the idea of the pursuer, and also about letting life, or allowing life to end on its own. And we will probably have a conversation just of end of life issues, but the idea of an abortion can also relate to end of life issues, which we will, like I said, we'll talk about another time. So abortion, according to Jewish law, is if we want to attach labels to this, Judaism is definitely pro-life, but with an asterisk, because there are many issues, as I've just presented, which arise that allow for abortion and allow for killing and self-defense. Whereas according to Christianity, when they are pro-life, the asterisk is a lot smaller, if not indetectable, right? Because there are depending on which branch of Christianity you talk to, there might be some that would allow for the health of the mother or some other extenuating circumstances for an abortion to be permitted. But for the most part, life for Christians begins at conception. Life for Jews begins at 40 days, but then only if that life is not endangering the life of the mother. Okay, so let me stop here and see if people have questions or comments about this. It's a complicated, I mean, this is a whole book about issues relating to abortion and marital relations and birth control. There's a lot of nuance, a lot of details here, but are there any questions or comments that people have? Barbara, did you have a question? Yeah, unmute yourself.
If life begins after 40 days, then why is there questioned before? Because it's not life yet.
Right, exactly. There is no question before. The only problem is that most women don't know before 40 days that they're pregnant. It usually gets to, when a woman would normally be expecting her next period. And if the period doesn't come and it's a little bit late, well, maybe a woman is normally irregular. So she wouldn't even begin to think, possibly to begin getting tested, to think about doing a pregnancy test until maybe it's 40 days after conception. Okay, so that's the issue. Yeah.
I was thinking, I somewhere I seem to remember that that life began after it wasn't at birth, but it was so many days after birth.
Right. Okay, yes, I was thinking that as I was talking through that, so thank you for reminding me about that. Yes, this issue of the pursuer. Oh yeah, the issue of when a life becomes a viable life can even be carried forward to what Barbara was alluding to there. And that is, a child is not considered an independent, viable life on his or her own until the child has reached 30 days after birth. So we have to think about this in a time when the rabbis were living 1800 years ago, 1500 years ago, when infant mortality was extremely high and extremely common. Children died before the age of 5, right? Very common. And even childbirth itself was a life-threatening experience. So if according to the rabbis, parents do not, if a child were to die within 30 days after being born, parents technically would not sit Shiva for that child, because the child has not had a full month of life on its own, and so would not sit Shiva and would not say Kaddish for this child either. So this is not common practice today for most Jews today, when infant mortality is so low. But if you understand this in the historical context in which the rabbis lived, if parents were to have to sit Shiva and say Kaddish for each and every child that were born to them, right? And we're thinking about parents, mothers in that day and age, 1500 years ago, would be pregnant many, many, many times. So if they would have to sit Shiva and say Kaddish for each and every child that were to die, and the likelihood is that they would have several children to die, they might not want or be motivated to have more children. It would be such a gut-wrenching, emotionally trying time that parents just would not want to, or would have the motivation or the wherewithal to keep on trying. However, so you can understand the kindness of the rabbis, the psychological kindness, not to force parents to be mourning for such a circumstance. However, in this day and age, it would be more common for parents. No, it would not common. I mean, that it would be more common for rabbis to suggest to parents that they do sit Shiva and do say Kaddish for a child who were to die, God forbid, within 30 days. So this viability of life, in terms of the rabbinic understanding, adds to the nuance of when does life begin. So you could argue that life begins at 40 days after conception, life begins at birth, or life begins on the 31st day after birth. All depends on how we interpret Jewish law and want to argue it for this sake. So yes, so this Barbara's question just adds to the extremely nuanced discussion of when life begins and how we define life. Any other questions or comments about this?
Rabbi,
So yes, Jules,
I'm curious about this. If a child,
I can't. Can you lean closer into your microphone? I can't hear you.
assuming that a child is stillborn,
Yes.
is there still the same issues about burial, etc.?
Yes, so a stillbirth would be buried, and even so a stillbirth. So if the stillbirth happened at 9 months, right? Let's say this fetus was fully formed when it was birthed by the mother. If it's a boy, in the process of the tahara, the preparation of this stillbirth for burial, the boy would be circumcised. So so yes. So not only would the stillbirth be buried, but if it was fully formed and a boy, it would be circumcised as well. So all the rituals would be performed on behalf of this stillbirth. And I would suggest to the parents to sit Shiva and to say Kaddish. You say Kaddish for 30 days for a child, God forbid. So yes, I would recommend the parents to say Kaddish for 30 days as well. It used to be back in the day that Jewish cemeteries would have a separate section just for, babies and stillbirths. And often they would be at the edge of the cemetery. So I know that King David has such a section. I don't know about Judean Gardens. I don't know about Mount Lebanon. Because I don't remember if there was a separate section for that burial that I did so many years ago. But many Jewish cemeteries have separate sections for that. But it doesn't mean, and it only means because the size of the plot is smaller than a regular plot. And cemeteries designate like half plots for such circumstances. But it doesn't mean that regular, let me say it this way, regular burial, Jewish burial would happen, and regular mourning would happen as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Okay. So when it comes to this Texas law and the intricacies of the law, which are clever in how they go about writing this law and ensuring that the law won't be knocked down. And I'm not a lawyer, but something about how private citizens are allowed to sue doctors if it's known that a doctor provides an abortion. So that there are many laws that are coming up in other states now, copycat laws. It's a very dangerous time for women in America today who would normally be allowed to have an abortion, but not now under Texas law. So it's a very dangerous time, and it really is setting the country apart from one region of the country against another region, one political party against another political party, using women's health as the tool in this argument. And that certainly Judaism does not teach that at all. And it has, I think, a very practical, realistic approach to defining when life begins and how to protect the life of the mother. So we'll stop here for today, and maybe next time we will talk about end of life issues. Right, that is healthcare proxy, Dr. Kevorkian, issues like that. We'll talk about that next Monday. So yes, Margie.
I just thought of this. Does the word rodef, can it also, it's not necessarily always negative connotation, like the synagogue rodef shalom.
Right, pursue peace.
Okay, so it
That's
doesn't
what it
mean,
means.
okay,
Right, so yeah. But in this context, a rodef is someone who's after your life. He's
Okay.
pursuing you, chasing you down, wanting to hurt you. The synagogue, rodef shalom, is just a pursuer of peace. We're running after in a spiritual way. Peace, yes. So yes, unfortunately, it has both those connotations. Yeah. All right. Have a good day, everybody. See you all next week.
Have a good day, all.